Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 119. On this week's podcast, Jen addresses the subject of email etiquette. Listen in as Jen flags the issues and trashes poor email behavior in her signature way. If you're tired of replying to undisclosed recipients who don't reply back, write in all caps, or leave the subject line blank, you can look forward to a great post from the diva. So go ahead and release your attachments to poor email practices and become a hot mailer.
Hey, welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast. This is Jen Swanson, your host, and I'm really glad that you're here listening to this episode 119. The numbers are getting up there, and I'm really grateful to all of you who have tuned in the past. And if you're here for the first time, welcome, and I'm glad you are listening. I have been thinking about email for a while. I wrote an article some time ago on LinkedIn, and my memory was jogged recently when one of my guests talked about RSVPing and how people were not doing that anymore. And I'm not sure if you heard that. I think it was 2 episodes ago, perhaps, when I had guest Lee Caraher on, and she was talking about people no longer bothering to RSVP or respond to emails that she sends out. And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, that's happened to me a few times. And it may just be that the person is busy. It may have a number of there may be a number of other reasons why a person is not answering the email, but it comes across as rude in some cases. And so it got me thinking about email again and why email etiquette is so important. How you use email as a communication tool in the workplace, if you're looking for a job, if you are in a job and hoping to advance your career, and even if you're not hoping to advance and you just want to be as successful and as productive as you can be in your current job, it is important to pay attention to email and some of the habits that we get into and maybe some of the things that could be improved. So I'm going to talk about 9 different things, and I think there's probably more things within each of these than 9, but that's the number I've got right now. So I'm going to go through and talk about email etiquette and how you can improve what you've been doing. Sometimes it's been called netiquette, and I think it's a little bit too cutesy for me. I haven't seen that lately, but a few years ago it used to be called netiquette. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the manners that you use and the ways that you can improve sending emails so that you are clear, so that people understand what it is you're talking about, so that mistakes and people don't misconstrue messages that you're trying to send, and also so that you avoid embarrassment and embarrassing mistakes. And I'm sure we've all sent an email and after we've hit send thought, oh, I shouldn't have sent that. And perhaps you've received email and that has confused you or made you wonder or upset you. So email is still powerful. And I know in the day of texting, people are texting a lot more and not using the telephone as much as we used to, that's for sure. Email is still a very used tool, a very powerful tool, and there's so much of it. Do you notice that? I mean, I hear people talk about inbox zero, and I just laugh because I'm embarrassed to tell you how much email is sitting in my inbox because I just haven't had the time to go through and clean it out, weed it out. And I get an awful lot of those automatic emails that come every day from different newsletters, different people that I follow. There's all sorts of stuff that if I had time, I would sit down and actually read. And I think, oh, I'll read it later. And then my inbox gets up into the, 1200s. And I think, oh my goodness, something is probably lost, buried deep down somewhere that I should have been paying attention to. And it's really quite overwhelming. So there are things that we can do, me included, to improve how we handle this thing called email. So let's take a look first at structure. This is my number one, structure, how you set up an email. Now, I don't know if you remember back in the day when you were in school, perhaps you were taught how to write a business letter in, I don't know if it would be elementary school or high school, probably high school, where you were taught how to organize your email. And how you organize your email will make a difference as to how it gets read and how it gets received. And the very first thing to think about is the subject line. So the subject line needs to be very clear. You want to make sure there are no mistakes. You want to make sure you are not using all capitals or no capitals at all, because then it may end up in your spam filter because it might look like spam. You want to be specific enough and give enough information in your subject line that people can see right away what this is about, and that might make a difference as to whether they open it or not immediately. I sent an email this morning because I have been recently hired by a company to do some facilitation, some workshops, and some lunch and learns for them. And for some reason, their payroll department decided to send me some money to my bank account before I have done any work for this company. And so this morning, I sent my contact person an email, and the subject heading was payroll error. I thought that was urgent looking enough that she might open it sooner than later and take a look at what I'm talking about. And it was because they had paid me before I had done any contracts or any work with them at all. So, which was very nice, but I'm sure somebody else was waiting for their paycheck somewhere in the country. So I wanted to make sure they got that and they opened it. So structuring your subject line, you need to make sure it is clear, that it's got a point to it. Saying hello or just something like that might end up in your spam filter. So make sure that you are very specific and that it's compelling enough for someone to open, because again, our email inboxes, I don't know, at least my email inbox is absolutely chock-a-block full these days. So I'm going to read the emails that seem most important at this time, and then when I've got a little bit of time, I'll go back and troll through the old ones. So be careful about the subject line. When you're writing your email, make sure that if this is an email to someone who you don't know or you don't know very well, that you write a small introduction. Introduce yourself. My name is Jen, and I met you last week at a networking event, and we talked about whatever we talked about. So make sure that you are not assuming that the person you're emailing knows who you are if it is a business email and it is somebody that you are not familiar with. So make sure you're introducing yourself to that person. Use spacing in paragraphs rather than one big block of text. It's much easier to scan and to read short chunks of text than it is to read one great big long block that doesn't have paragraphs. It's kind of like when you introduce yourself, you say a little bit about what it is you're looking for, what the content of the email is, if there's anything you want them to follow up with, and then at the end, make sure that you have a signature line. So it doesn't have to be a handwritten type signature, it can just be your name, but make sure it also includes your contact information. So how is this person to get back to you? Are you going to include a telephone number, an address, your email address, whatever it is? Include a signature line at the bottom so that they know who you are and how to reach you to respond if they choose not to respond by email. That's very important. Capital letters in email means that you are yelling. And I've seen so many people in comment sections and that who use all capital letters. It's actually really rude. If you mean to yell, that's one thing. But if you are sending a work email, chances are you don't mean to yell. So be careful of your caps lock. And the best way to avoid sending something that might have too many capital letters in it is to proofread it at the end. So take a look. Use capitals only at the start of the sentence or for proper names, or if you wish to emphasize something, but it would actually be better to use bold text because, again, all capitals comes across as rude or angry communication. And I saw something on Facebook the other day, and someone, an older person, had written something that was all in capital letters, and the person's son underneath wrote, "Stop yelling, Mom." And it was kind of funny because it really did look like this person was shrieking her statement underneath the picture on Facebook. So be careful of that. Another thing when you're structuring it is to know your recipient and use care when using things like emojis and smiley faces and exclamation marks. Those are very rarely, if ever, used in a professional setting. They can be quite appropriate in social circles. It's fine if you're emailing a colleague and it's not, something that will be seen by anyone else publicly. So if you want to say, coffee break at 9:30, meet you at the cafeteria, smiley face, that's one thing. But if you're sending a professional email, try to avoid using the little smiley emojis and faces. And sometimes what happens is, depending on what program you're using for your email, sometimes people will put a little smiley face and it shows up as some other symbol at the other end. So it's not always a good idea. It's mostly never a good idea to use those kinds of things in a professional email. So be careful about using those things. The same goes with the jargon and slang when you're structuring your email. Be careful about using jargon unless you know the recipient, you know the person will understand the medical terminology that you're using or the name of some kind of equipment or tool that you're using. And be careful of slang. Try to be more professional. Begin with hello, so-and-so. Nowadays we're not getting so formal that we say dear sir or madam. We're not getting so formal that we say hello, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. That gets confusing as well. Although if you do know the title of the person that you're emailing, it's quite appropriate to use it, and to be aware of using hi instead of hello, which is more professional and more formal, or good evening or good afternoon, something like that would be more appropriate as well. So those are some of the things that I wanted to say about structure. Number 2, replying, things to think about. So I've already mentioned how email overload happens, how my inbox is in need of clearing out. And one thing that is really frustrating is getting unnecessary replies to email because one person in the group hits reply all, and then everyone sees the entire conversation. Now that is appropriate if all of you are trying to plan something together and you all need to see the thread of the email. But if one person starts having a side conversation with another and no one else in the group needs to see it, you will get some frustrated responses from people saying, stop hitting reply all. Because again, our inboxes often are flooded with email, and it can be really frustrating to see everything someone else is talking about when it has no relevance to you. So be careful with the hitting reply all. It is appropriate if everyone in the email group needs to see the responses, then that is. When you do reply, what is helpful is being brief. It's the same as when you're structuring your email. Get to the point. You don't need to tell a whole great big long story. If you do have a great big long story to tell, then perhaps the telephone is a better medium. So if you are sending an email, try and keep to the point because, again, people are busy and they don't have a lot of time to sit and read pages and pages of email. So be brief. And in your replying, be brief as well. If you are replying to several items, it can be really helpful to include excerpts of the original email above your responses to help the receiver remember what it is that you're addressing in the first place. Sometimes people do that. They will respond right within the body of the email that was sent in the first place, and perhaps in a different color. If you're going to do that, just at the top of the email, say, "See responses below," so the person knows to scroll down and get to the body of the original email and then see your responses. I find that kind of response helpful sometimes, especially if there are a number of items that needed to be addressed in the particular email. So that's replying. Be careful about the reply all, and be careful about being brief when you are replying. The other thing is, I'll say it again, is to actually reply. If someone sends you an email, a great big long email, then take a little bit of time to answer. One thing that I find is quite rude is when people reply with one word. I've sent a great big long email with a bunch of questions. How are you? Blah, 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 blah. And I get "sure," or I get "fine, I'll be there." Like no hello, no goodbye, no thank you, no nothing, and it comes across as rude. Now, maybe the person is just trying to be efficient, but I remember asking a person if they would do some reading on a Sunday morning in my church job, and I sent a great big long email, and the response I got back was "sure." And I thought, okay, that's great. I'm really glad that that person would do this. But I had asked a number of questions, and my email had taken me quite some time to write. And I don't know what the circumstance was. Maybe the person was on transit somewhere or busy doing something else, and they just wanted to respond. But it comes across as not having taken a lot of time in making some kind of a response. It would have been nice to have a few more words than just one. All right, that's number 2, replying. Number 3 is check first. Resources are everywhere online, and you can find almost any answer. Sometimes, however, you might hit reply and ask a question that was addressed in the initial email. I have done this, and I have done this because I read the email too quickly. Has that ever happened to you? You'll be reading an email and you just go too fast through the email and you fire off a question, and then you realize after you have had the chance to read the email again that the question that you have has already been answered. That is annoying to people, and I know that I have done that because I have not taken the time to actually read more slowly. Another place to check if the email has come from a business is the frequently asked questions, the FAQ section, where many of the same questions that you have may already be answered. So there are on many websites places where you can look for answers to questions that people might have, especially if you're buying a service or hiring a service or purchasing a product. There might be questions there that you have that other people have had that you will be able to look for. So check before you answer back so quickly. So take a little bit of time before you zip a response back. Number 4 is forgiveness is good. Everyone makes mistakes. And once upon a time, I was trying to organize a concert event with a woman, and I thought she was angry with me for emailing her during the day at work because I got her response back, and again, it was all in capital letters, and what she said was, "I will respond to this after work when I get home." And because it was all in capital letters, I felt badly, and I thought maybe I shouldn't have been emailing her on her work email, although that was the only email I had for her, and this was the address she had given me. And when I asked her about it hours later in the evening, she laughed and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I hit caps lock by accident and I didn't bother to change it back." So here I had wasted a whole bunch of time and energy thinking I had offended her and worrying about why she might have been offended that I was emailing her at work. So everyone makes a mistake, and sometimes I have often made mistakes when sending emails, spelling or what have you. So be careful about criticizing people immediately. And again, forgiveness is good because I've had to ask for it a few times. I remember when one of our kids got email for the first time, back when kids were still using email, and she started sending her emails all in capital letters with 15 exclamation marks after every sentence. And it took us sitting down and explaining to her that that wasn't how you actually used email. But she was just really excited that she'd gotten an email address. So, we're all new at one time or another, and being patient is good. So that was number 4. Number 5, watch your funny bone. Use of humor can be tricky in written form, especially in an email. And without what we call paralanguage, or all that language that goes on in communication around words, so tone of voice, facial expressions, what your eyes are doing, what your body language is doing, it's really hard to understand the tone and sometimes even the meaning of an email when you don't have that paralanguage that goes around with it. Because you can say, how are you doing? And you can say, fine. Well, you can hear that I have a smile in my voice when I say that. Whereas if someone says, how are you doing? And I say, fine, then obviously I'm not so fine. But when you type the word F-I-N-E, there's no context for it. There's no way to know if the person is actually fine. And this is why emojis were invented. We're creatures of invention, right? So we invented emojis and little words like LOL for laugh out loud and that kind of thing to soften and to try and give the context to the words. Now, those things, again, don't work in business communication, which is why it's extra important to be careful when you think you're being funny or you think you're making a joke, because it may not come across as such. Quite some time ago, there was an email sent out by a colleague to a group of people making making a little bit of a joke in a self-deprecating way that actually was received not in that way at all by someone at the other end, and it caused upset and hurt. And again, it was meant in a tone of humor. It was meant to be funny, and it didn't come across as funny to at least one particular person, and so caused some conflict as a result. And this is what happens all the time. If people read things the wrong way, they read into the words that are written. And so when we are not able to use emojis and LOLs and exclamation marks and smiley faces and all of those things, we have to be very careful about the structure and the way that words are used. And so using humor is not always such a good idea, because my sense of humor will be different than your sense of humor, and that'll be different from the next person's sense of humor. And so the humor will not always translate on a piece of paper. It's one thing if you're in person and you can roll your eyes, you can tilt your head, you can put some tonality to the word, but when you are writing it on a computer, it does not always come across as very funny, and it can come across as offensive. And so if you are wanting to be professional, I would say be really careful about the email humor. Forwarding jokes and cute little images can also be really tiresome and annoying unless they are relevant to the receiver. So sending what you think is cute and funny to everyone on your contact list is a sure way to exasperate other people. And it might be offensive to some, depending on what it is that you're sending. I have actually deleted a couple of contacts who never sent me any real mail. They only sent me sappy chain letters and annoying slideshows of sunsets to music. So after a while, I thought, I just don't want to see this. Another thing that happens to me is, because I happen to be a church minister, is people send me religious jokes. And, sometimes they're funny, but other times it's like, oh, really? I guess people think that I would think this was funny. So, and the same ones go around and around and around the internet. So that's part of what fills up the inbox sometimes. So be careful about sending those things around to people, and think, is this really how they want to be spending their time, is opening this kind of stuff. Number 6 is being mean, flaming, or cyberbullying, or just being nasty. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because there are whole sites devoted to this terrible kind of behavior. But using email to attack or to intimidate another person is about as cool as New York in August. And if you didn't catch my intonation there, I was being sarcastic. This is not good behavior. In fact, it can be extremely damaging behavior. And flaming means launching a vicious verbal attack on somebody, saying nasty things, spreading rumors, burning them with words. And forwarding an email of this sort is the same thing as participating in the attack, and sometimes there are legal consequences and ramifications. You become part of the problem if you spread it around. And people have actually been prosecuted for doing this sort of thing. Don't forget that email doesn't go away. If you send something out on the email, it's there, and it's pretty permanent. So you want to be really in a good frame of mind before you hit send, and you want to make sure that you've really weighed the consequences. And so that is unfortunate. I hate reading comment sections on articles that are published in the newspaper and that, because people are hiding behind the screen and the keyboard and can be really mean. You've heard of haters. And there are people who are very brave and very, very vicious and nasty when they're using the keyboard and they're typing things behind a screen, because they're not saying it to the face. It's particularly bad right at the moment, and I've just stopped reading those things because they're pretty upsetting. Cyberbullying is long-term sustained terrorizing of somebody on the internet, and it can be really subtle, or it can be really obvious. If you think you're being bullied online, please tell someone. Tell someone with authority. Just tell somebody, because you don't need to be subjected to that. And again, cowardly people can behave extremely badly when they don't actually have to face their victims. So it's these practices have serious consequences, and they are never, never acceptable. So be really careful about what you say when you're sending an email, even if you are extremely angry. Just take a breather. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Number 7 is respect privacy. Forwarding emails you get from someone without deleting the original name or original email of the sender can be a violation of privacy. The original person sent the message to you, not to your friends or the rest of your colleagues. So forwarding an email to a whole bunch of other people, if there is private or sensitive material in it, can really be not a good thing. Another thing that can be a violation is sending a group email to people who don't know each other. And unless you send it to yourself and have your list of contacts in the blind carbon copy, the BCC box, then everyone is going to have everyone's email address. And that is only okay if the group has okayed that practice. So you need to be very careful of privacy and whose email you are sharing around when you're sending a group email. Now, in a workplace setting, there should be ways that you can do that. Maybe there are groups already set up in your email. Maybe it's okay to send things to all of the people at their work addresses. It's when you start using home addresses that people might get upset about the privacy. So be careful about privacy rights, respecting the privacy of everyone involved. If you're going to be speaking about something over email, you want to make sure it is something that is okay if someone else takes a look at it. Private email isn't really a thing anymore. Email is out there. Email can be, hacked into. Email can be seen from the employer's end. And you want to be careful at work that you are not sending things that are sensitive or personal or private. I was working in a hospital system, and there was a person who happened to be a union rep, and she was sending email that was actually union email through her hospital email address. And she was sending out notices to people to come to some union meeting that was happening. Well, in a case like that, the union reps are supposed to use either their private home email addresses or the union email addresses. They are not supposed to use their hospital email addresses because, of course, the hospital is the employer and the union is the union. Well, if you think that people aren't watching when you're sending in a public, sending email from your workplace, a few moments after she had sent the email, her phone rang and she was given a complete dressing down by a manager about inappropriate use of the hospital email system. So her email was being read and looked at. Now, I don't know if she'd been singled out because she'd been doing this before or what was going on, but she told us that they knew and they had obviously read what it was that she was looking at. So companies do have the capability of seeing what emails are being sent when you are using their system. It is their system. So make sure that what you are sending is is okay for the public to see, because it may end up in the future being public. Okay. Number 8 is before you hit send, remember that email is forever. Email can be printed out. Email can be forwarded. Email can be saved, and screenshots can be made of email. Email is not a safe way to communicate if what you are communicating could come back to bite you in the end. So it is never a wise practice to send an email when you're in a highly emotional state, whether that be in anger or in lust. For instance, once you send it, you can't get it back. And you want to make sure that you are sending it when you are in a good headspace, so that if it does end up in the wrong hands, you are protecting yourself. Proofread your work. Spelling mistakes can be embarrassing and can cause communication mayhem. So make sure, if it's an important email, before you send it, proofread it. Even if it's not a super important email, take a few moments to read through it and see. And if the topic, again, is sensitive, it may be best or safer or wiser to use the telephone to communicate, or even better yet, be face-to-face. And make sure, this is the biggest one, that you are sending it to the correct recipient. Make sure you've selected the correct person. If you're selecting it from a list of an employee list, make sure that you're sending it to the correct Sandra on your email list or whatever the name is, because you might know 3 people by the same name. Make sure that what it is you're sending is going to the correct person and is that you are sending it from the right frame of mind. Number 9 is to practice courtesy. And so good email etiquette involves being courteous, being brief, being on topic, and being relevant. And make sure you begin with a greeting, as I said before, even if it simply is hello, or hi if it's not a formal business email. Make sure you use please and thank you. Again, have your name and your full position if it's a work email, and contact info, so your office phone number or your cell phone number, if you can, and an email return address. Make sure as a recipient that you reply to urgent or time-sensitive messages. If someone sends you an email and you are supposed to reply, make sure even you can even just reply and say, I've received your email. I will respond after lunch. If you have to. You can also use automatic reply settings in email so that the person who sent the email knows that you received it. There's nothing more frustrating than sending off something like a job application or a letter of reference or whatever it might be and hearing absolutely nothing. And it causes a person to wonder, did I send it to the right address? Did they get it? Did they check their email? We actually want email response pretty quickly. I give it a day or two, but some people want to hear right now, like, within an hour, you didn't answer my email. Well, no, I actually have a life and I'm doing other things that don't involve staring at a screen all day. But it is a good practice to say, yes, thank you. I've received your email. I will respond when I can. So just respond a little bit. That's the same thing as the RSVP, which stands for Réponse, s'il vous plaît, which means response, please, respond, please, in French. So RSVP is important. Answer back. If you can't go to something, answer back. If you've received something, answer back. It doesn't have to be a long answer, but it's an acknowledgement. And a lot of conflict can be avoided if we simply acknowledged one another. Once you hit send in an email, you no longer have any control over what happens to that message. Once you hit send, you have zero control over what happens to that message. And I know I already said that, but it's a really important thing to remember. So make sure that what you're sending, that it won't be damaging if it gets into somebody else's hands or it comes back 5 years later. Because, again, things can be printed out, saved, screenshotted, forwarded, and put in your employee file. So make sure that you are completely confident with what you are sending before you send it. Being polite and courteous and professional will reflect well upon you. It will ensure that you won't have anything that will come back and haunt you in the future. Your email is a communication, and the way you communicate, even via email, is a reflection on you. So if it's messy, if it's sloppy, if it's angry, if it's curt, if you are missing letters and missing words, you will look disorganized, unprofessional, and if your spelling is bad, you'll look sloppy or maybe even unintelligent. All of these things can be determined from reading one of your emails. So you want to take some care with it because it is again, a communication about who you are. Even if it's not accurate, maybe you were busy and you had 15 things you were doing and you just threw a quick email and you spelled something wrong. Unfortunately, we make assumptions and we make judgments about others all the time, and your email is open to that as well. So be careful when you're sending an email, especially if you're sending it to somebody important that you consider important in your workplace. And again, it speaks about you and how you work and who you are and your professionalism. So be careful with that. Those are, I think, all of the things that I needed to share with you today. And I hope this information is useful. Communication is my passion, and helping others to connect and engage and find their true purpose is what I do in everything that I do. If you're looking for online courses, I've got a couple of options up at the moment and a third one coming. I've got a resume course up online for you, and this is how to structure your resume in a way that will help it to get to the top of the pile in a recruiter's office. This is a video-based course. It is less than an hour long, and there's that option. And then the second option is that same course, but with a personal resume review by me. So you can choose to just do the course, or you can choose to do the package that is the course, and then having me actually take a look at your resume and make some personal suggestions for that. Those are two of the things that are up there. I've also got a couples communication course. It is called Marriage Works. It is up online as well at courses.communicationdiva.com. This is an in-depth course for your relationship. And although it's called Marriage Works, it doesn't have to be about people getting married. It could be people in a long-term committed relationship with each other. And the course takes you through everything from family of origin topics to how you divide up household duties, to conflict management styles, to how to stay connected and how to keep that spark in your relationship. There are all sorts of topics. I think there's 16 or 17 sections in that course, and that is also up at courses.communicationdiva.com. And the one that's coming out in the near future, I've got partway through the planning, is one on interview skills, how to do a really good job at going through an interview for how to be really good at going through an interview for a job. So I'm going to have that one up in the near future. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Please share this episode and share it with your friends and on social media with the buttons over at communicationdiva.com. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Until next time, take care. This is Jen Swanson.